Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, don't we? So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Hello, everybody. I was watching chat just now. 30 episodes. My goodness. That's incredible. Before we get started, I want to invite you to do something a little bit strange for a YouTube episode, and that's to close your eyes. Close your eyes and listen in your head to the sound of a steam whistle. Can you hear it? That sound, that unforgettable sound. In the early 1900s, this was the sound of connection, of progress, of possibility. Before highways stretched across America, before airplanes made the world small, the railroad was everything. It was how news traveled. It was how families reunited, how a young person might leave a small town and chase a dream. And in one small town in Missouri, a young boy heard that whistle every day. He'd stand at the edge of his family's farm, watching the great iron horses wander past, smoke billowing into the prairie sky. That boy's name was Walter Elias Disney. He said, "I suppose I've always been in love with trains." Well, that's Walt Disney speaking to Railroad magazine in October 1965. Tonight, we're going to trace that love from a child's wonder in Marceline to a backyard railroad in Los Angeles, to the trains that circle Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom to this very day. Now, this isn't just a story about theme park attractions tonight. This is a story about how a childhood passion, nurtured, protected, and eventually shared, changed the world. Welcome back to Grand and Miraculous, folks, where we unveil the magic behind theme park attractions. I'm John, aka Spaceship Years, and this is episode 30. Hard to believe. We made it. Well, in case this is the first time you're watching us, our mission is very simple. It's to celebrate the art of the theme park experience, the engineering, the storytelling, the creativity, and to give every attraction its day in the sun, or in this case, its day on the rails. Now, we evaluate attractions using 3 different pillars. There's immersion. How completely does the experience transport you to a different world? There's storytelling. What is a narrative? How effectively is it told? And there's delight. Does the attraction surprise you? Does it move you? Does it make you smile? Well, tonight we're rating the overall experience, the Disney Railroad experience holistically, considering Disneyland, Walt Disney World, and the legacy that connects them all. And by the way, last week's vote on the submarine voyage completely shocked me. It had a huge reaction. The community rating was 9.0, which is awesome to see. People love the submarines. So I'm really grateful for you to contribute. And I want to encourage you to continue that on. As always, we want your voice in this conversation too. So please go to www.grandandmiraculous.show, cast your vote. Tonight's voting code is WDRR. That's WDRR for the Walt Disney World or Walt Disney Railroad. Nightbot will be mentioning this in the chat, by the way, in case you forget it. I want to give a quick shout out to our friends at the Disney Streamer Network. If you love deep dives into Disney history and attractions and streams, please do check them out. They're great folks. And of course, I have to call out the big news of the day, right? I can't have a show about attractions and not call this out. Josh D'Amaro, huh? He's taking over as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Big deal. I'll dig into that more into the weeks ahead, of course, but it really just shows how essential the parks are and how everything inside them are to the whole Disney experience. Let me wander over to chat and say hi to folks. I see Miss Udalali Lane. Hello, Kate. Hope you're doing great. Dave Strygand is in the house. Hey, Dave. Miss Debbie Bernfeld. How are you, Debbie? Great to see you. Matt's in the house. Hey, Matt. I appreciate everything you do for me, man. Lamont Gray's in the house. Been here since episode 1. Thanks for being there for me, bud. Let's see. Jeannie is in the house. Hi, Jeannie. Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Alyssa and Neil. Neil's such a big cheerleader. He leaves me the nicest compliments, and he's a heck of a musician. So I'm so grateful that you're here. Let's see. Who else did I not see? Scroll, scroll, scroll. I saw Miss Kay. Hello. And my dad. How are you doing, Pops? Thanks for being here and all your support. Jason Thibodeau's in the house. Hey, Jason. Hope you're doing great. And scroll, scroll, scroll. Miss Sierra. I see Cruise and Theme Park Guide in the house. Hello, Sierra. Thanks for being here. And Grant Bruner. Hey, Grant, how's it going? Thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it. All right. If I saw some other folks. Paul's in the house. Hey, Paul. Hope Stephanie has her Seahawks jersey on. Just saying. And now I angered half the audience. No. And let's go to, I saw Jeannie. Nico the Greco. Hey, Nico. Hope you're doing fantastic. Thanks for being here. All right. If I missed you, my apologies. I'll come back and get you. But we got to get to the meat of the story. So let's get to the station, huh? Now, to tell this story properly, we need to understand something. There wasn't just one Disney Railroad, okay? There were 3. Each were a stepping stone to Walt's dream. Now, the first one was the one he built in his own backyard. This was a Carroll Road Pacific Railroad, named for his street address, 355 Carrollwood Drive. This was Walt's personal railroad. A half mile of track was winding through his Holmby Hills property. The locomotive, well, he named it after his wife, the Lily Bell. And there's a one he built for the world, of course. The Disneyland Railroad opened on July 17th, 1955. The same day the park opened. 5 steam locomotives now circle 1.2 miles of track, passing through tunnels, past dioramas, carrying guests from one land to the next. And finally, the one he never lived to see, the Walt Disney World Railroad, which opened in 1971, 5 years after Walt's death. Now, its 4 locomotives were rescued from the jungles of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, working trains given new life. 3 railroads, 1 dream. Now, here's a trivia question to keep in the back of your mind and to ponder in case you want something else to think about. What year was the Primeval World diorama added to the Disneyland Railroad? And more challengingly, do you know what its origin was? If you think you know, stay on board, mention it in chat, and you can compare notes. Now, to understand Walt Disney love of trains, you have to go back, way back, before the studio, before the mouse, before the magic. We have to go to Marceline. Now, Walt Disney was born in Chicago on December 5th, 1901. but it was a small town in Missouri that would shape his imagination for the rest of his life. In 1906, when Walt was just 4 or 5 years old, the Disney family moved to a farm near Marceline. Now, for young Walt, this wasn't just a change of scenery. This was Eden, okay? Marceline was where Walt learned to draw, sketching the animals on his family farm. It was where he first discovered the joy of storytelling, and it was where he fell in love with trains. You see, Walt had a secret weapon when it came to bragging rights amongst his schoolmates. This is a quote. "My Uncle Mike was engineer on the Santa Fe's accommodation train that ran between Marceline and Fort Madison. Now that was something to brag about to my schoolmates at a time when the railroads loomed large in the scheme of things, and steam engines were formidable and exciting." Uncle Mike Martin, a real train engineer. To a small boy in 1908, having an uncle that drove one of those massive iron horses, belching steam, commanding the rails, well, that was like having an uncle who was an astronaut. But the railroad connection went even deeper. Walt's own father, Elias Disney, had worked laying tracks for the Union Pacific Railroad. Now, those stories of sweat and steel, of building the great arteries that connected a growing nation, they weren't abstract to young Walt. They were family history. And in Marceline, the railroad wasn't just transportation. It was the heartbeat of the town. Now consider this. In 1908, Marceline had only 2 automobiles. 2. But the railroad connected this little Missouri town to Kansas City, to Chicago, to the whole wide world. This depot was the center of everything. People gathered there to send packages, receive news, welcome visitors. The train whistle was a daily symphony, a call to possibility, a reminder that there was a much bigger world out there. Now, as a teenager, Walt found his own place on the rails. He got a job as what's called a news butcher on the Missouri Pacific Railway. This was a job selling candy, newspapers, and magazines to passengers. Here's a picture of, or a drawing, nevertheless, of Thomas Edison. He was also a news butcher. Now think about that for a moment. A teenage Walt Disney walking the aisles of a moving train, observing people from all walks of life. Businessmen heading to meetings, families traveling to new homes, soldiers going off to war. Every passenger had a story, and Walt, like a sponge, ever the storyteller, was absorbing everything. The Disney family eventually left Marceline. Life moved on, as it always does, but those memories, the whistle, the steam, the sense of adventure never left Walt. Years later, he would tell interviewers that his happiest memories were of Marceline. And when he built Main Street U.S.A. at Disneyland, it wasn't modeled on a big city. It was modeled on Marceline, the small town of his childhood, the place where a young boy first heard the call of the rails. Now let's jump ahead a little bit. The 1940s. Walt Disney is now one of the most famous men in America. Snow White has made history. Fantasia has pushed the boundaries of animation. The Disney World, or I should say the Disney Studio, is a world unto itself. But there's a problem. Walt is somewhat restless. The war years had been very hard. The studio had been largely taken over by the government, making training films and propaganda. The 1940 animator strike had left scars. Fantasia, his passion project, had been a commercial disappointment. Walt was searching for something, although he might not have known what at the time. Well, among his top animators were 2 men who would play a crucial role in reigniting his passion. There was Ward Kimball pictured here, one of the legendary 9 old men of Disney animation. Now, he was a genius behind Jiminy Cricket, the Cheshire Cat, Mad Hatter. He was a brilliant, eccentric artist and a complete train fanatic. There was Ollie Johnston, another of the 9 old men, the animator behind Bambi's Thumper, Pinocchio's heartbreaking moments, and countless beloved characters. Also a train fanatic. Now, Ward Kimball didn't just like trains, he owned one. In 1938, Ward Kimball bought a dilapidated wooden passenger coach from the Southern Pacific Railroad for $50. It had been built in 1881 for the Carson and Colorado Railroad. Now, his wife Betty suggested that he should also have a locomotive to pull it. So Ward Kimball purchased a locomotive called the Sidney Dillon for over $400, saving it from being sold for scrap in Japan. It was a 260 steam locomotive built by Baldwin in 1881 for the Nevada Central Railroad. Now, he renamed it. He called it Emma Nevada, after the famous opera star of the same era. And he built the Grizzly Flats Railroad in his San Gabriel, California backyard. Now, keep in mind, this wasn't just a model train. This was a real full-sized railroad. The first full-size backyard railroad, in fact, in the United States. This was a 3-acre operation with 900 feet of track. Now, here's the key moment. On October 20th, 1945, Walt Disney attended one of Kimball's famous steam-ups, parties that were hosted when the Grizzly Flats Railroad was in operation. Now, during that party, Kimball gave Walt the opportunity to drive the Emma Nevada. And here's what's remarkable. It was the first time since working as a teenager on the Missouri Pacific Railway that Walt had even been inside a locomotive cab. Now think about that for a moment. Decades had passed. Walt had built an animation empire. He created Mickey Mouse, Snow White, Fantasia. But when he climbed into that cab and he took the throttle of Ward Kimball's locomotive, there was something that awakened. Now, Ollie Johnston had his own backyard railroad too, the La Cañada Valley Railroad, a 1/12 scale operation that he ran for 50 years. He even had a railroad at his vacation property. Now, between the two, the Disney studio had become a haven for train lovers. And Walt, surrounded by their enthusiasm, well, he felt that old fire rekindling for sure. And then came the polo injury. In late 1947, Walt hurt himself playing polo. Now, during the recovery, with time on his hands and his usual projects on hold, well, he took up a new hobby, model trains. He started with Lionel sets, the same trains many American boys played with in their living rooms. In fact, if you've played with one of these, mention it in chat. It'll be fun to reminisce. But Walt, being Walt, he couldn't stop there, of course. There's a wonderful story about how it all came together, in fact. One December day, Ward Kimball burst into Ollie Johnston's office. "Hey, come on upstairs. Walt's got a Lionel train up there, and he's going to give it to Roy Jr. for Christmas." Well, they went up to a room just off Walt's office. While they were looking at the layout, Walt came in and said to Ollie, "I didn't know you were interested in trains." And Ollie replied, "Yeah, I'm building a backyard railroad." And Walt's eyes lit up. "Hey, I always wanted a backyard railroad." Well, a week or two later, Walt called Ollie and wanted to see his locomotive. They visited Ollie's machinist in Santa Monica together. Walt came back 3 or 4 times to observe the work. And all the while, Walt was making plans for his own. Well, the hobby grew. The trains got bigger. The layouts got more elaborate. Encouraged by Walt Kimball and Ollie Johnston, inspired by their backyard railroads, Walt looked at his model trains and he said, "I want something bigger. I want something I can ride." And that's when he went home to talk to his wife. Let me pop over to chat. I see some new folks in chat I want to say hi to. Scrolling. Brittany W. Hey, Brittany. Hope you're doing fantastic. Thanks for being here. Nico, I said hi to you, I think. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Scroll. Tony O'Tower is in the house. Hey, Tony. Hope you're doing great. Thanks for being here. All right. I see some great comments. Keep on with the memories. And if you ever had a model railroad, tell us a little bit about it. Okay. Now, Walt had a passion, but he had one obstacle to get past. Let's move on. 355 Carrollwood Drive, Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. Now, this was Walt and Lillian Disney's home. Of course, this is a modern picture, but you get the idea. It's a beautiful property with sprawling grounds, shaded by nature trees, offering the kind of privacy that a man of Walt's fame desperately needed. It was also, Walt decided, well, the perfect location for a railroad. Now, he had to convince Lillian. And Lillian God bless her, had some concerns. A train in the backyard with tracks and tunnels and a locomotive that belched real steam. But she loved Walt. She understood his passions. And God bless her, she said yes. To show his gratitude, Walt decided to name the locomotive after her, the Lily Bell. Now, we need to add someone to the picture here. Enter Roger Broggie, head of the Disney Studios machine shop. Now, he was a skilled craftsman, an engineer of extraordinary precision, and a man who would become essential to Disney history. Well, Walt approached Broggie with his vision, a 1/8 scale live steam locomotive, something he could ride, something real. Well, Broggie assembled a team, and they got to work. The Lily Bell was designed, in fact, after the Central Pacific number 173. This was a locomotive from the late 1800s, and it was a work of art. The tender could hold 13 liters of water and 4.5 kilograms of coal. Every detail was authentic. Well, on December 20th, 1949, during a lunch break at the studio, the Lily Bell took its first test run on temporary track. A remarkable photograph from that day shows the assembled crowd. There was Roger Broggie, Ward Kimball, lots of other animators, and they all gathered to watch Walt's locomotive come to life. And then on Christmas Eve, they did it again. Imagine Walt's joy that night, surrounded by his team, the locomotive running beautifully. On May 7th, 1950, the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad officially opened. Walt's backyard railroad was complete. Now, I have to point out the layout was remarkable. 7.25-inch gauge track over 2,600 feet of it, with tunnels, turns, and all kinds of gradients. The train wound through the whole property, past flower beds and under trees. Here's a look at the map in case you just thought it was a loop. Oh, no. It was very sophisticated. Well, you can imagine, Walt became the neighborhood legend overnight. There were kids for miles around who would come to ride Mr. Disney's train. Walt, of course, he was dressed in his engineer's cap, would give them the ride of their lives. But here's the thing about Walt. He never did anything small, and his tunnel system proved a little bit problematic. You see, Walt built a S-curve tunnel that required passengers to duck down low to avoid bumping their heads. Well, legend has it that Lillian Disney, while riding as a passenger, she had some difficulties navigating this tunnel, shall we say. The story goes that Lillian emerged from the tunnel with her hair disheveled and her dignity somewhat ruffled. She had words for Walt afterwards, but she kept riding that train because she loved him, quirks and all. But there was a more serious moment too. There was a derailment one day, and it resulted in a 5-year-old girl getting injured. She was okay, but Walt was shaken. He made the difficult decision to eventually close at Carrollwood Pacific. But here's the thing. That dream didn't die. In fact, it grew larger. Today, the workshop where Walt tinkered with his trains, a structure known as Walt's Barn, has been preserved. It was relocated to Griffith Park in Los Angeles, where it's now a museum managed by the Carrollwood Society. And if you've ever in LA, you should definitely go and visit if you can. Stand in that space where imagination met mechanics, where a man who had already created Mickey Mouse and changed animation forever found joy in the simple pleasure of trains. Now, this barn is sometimes called the birthplace of Imagineering because it was here, working on his railroad, that Walt began to think differently about entertainment. Not just movies, not just cartoons, experiences, environments, places where people could step into another world. Walt stood at the edge of his backyard one day. He was watching the Lily Bell circle his property, and he asked himself a question. Why should I share this with just the neighborhood? I could share this with millions. And that question led to Disneyland. I see a comment in chat. Kate was asking, is that Sharon and Diane right behind Walt on that train? That is a good question. It might be. I actually don't know. Chime in the chat if you do. So Before we continue to Disneyland, we have to pause to honor a man whose name you might not know, but whose fingerprints are in everything we've discussed tonight. And that man, of course, is Roger Broggie. Now, he wasn't a household name. He never became famous like the animators or the executives. But without Roger Broggie, the Disney railroads as we know them would not exist. Now, Broggie was the head of the Disney Studios machine shop, like I mentioned. He was a craftsman who built the Lily Bell. He supervised the construction of the first 2 Disneyland locomotives. And when Walt Disney World needed trains, it was Broggie who found them. In 1968, 2 years after Walt's death, Broggie led a scouting expedition to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. There, on the, I can't pronounce it, Ferrocarriles Unidos de Yucatan, the United Railways of Yucatan, he discovered 5 old locomotives that had spent decades hauling goods, people, and all kinds of things through the jungle. Now, these weren't showpieces, they were workhorses. They were covered in rust and decades of hard labor. But Roger Broggie saw their potential. Well, he brought them back to Florida. They were restored. They were transformed. They were Disneyfied. And today, those locomotives, the Walter E. Disney, the Lily Bell, the Roger E. Broggie, and the Roy O. Disney, still circle the Magic Kingdom. Now, Roger Broggie became a Disney legend, and one of those locomotives, number 3, bears his name. The man who turned Walt's passion into park reality. July 17th, 1955. Television cameras are rolling. Celebrities are arriving. 90 million Americans are watching live as Walt Disney opens the gates to his impossible dream, Disneyland. While the opening, of course, was famously chaotic, the asphalt was still soft in places. There were some drinking fountains that didn't work, but there were far more people than expected. But overall, one thing worked perfectly from the very first moment, and that was a train. Well, Walt Disney himself was at the throttle of engine number 2, the E.P. Ripley, as it pulled away from Main Street Station for its first official journey around Disneyland. Aboard that train were California Governor Goodwin J. Knight and Fred Gurley, the president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, Disneyland's original railroad sponsor. Now think about this moment. This man who had stood as a boy watching trains thunder past his family's farm in Marceline, well, he was now the engineer of his own railroad, a railroad that millions of people could ride. A childhood dream fully realized. Now, the Disneyland Railroad, originally called the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad, featured locomotives built specifically for the park. The first 2 were the C.K. Holiday and the E.P. Ripley. They were constructed by Wet Enterprises based on the design of Walt's Lily Bell. Now, over the years, 3 more locomotives were added. There was a Fred Gurley, an 1894 Baldwin that actually worked on a Louisiana plantation railroad. And here's a great story. Roger Broggie, he found this locomotive sitting unused in Louisiana. He bought it himself, paid less than $1,200 for it. As Broggie later said, quote, "If Walt had gone down there, the price would have tripled." There was Ernest S. Marsh, another Baldwin from 1925. And finally, in 2005, the Ward Kimball, named for the animator whose backyard railroad had inspired Walt all those years ago. Full circle. The man who had invited Walt into his locomotive cab in 1945, who had rekindled that childhood fire, now had a Disneyland locomotive bearing his name for eternity, hopefully. Well, the stations tell their own story, of course. Main Street Station is a grand Victorian depot, greeting guests as they enter the park. New Orleans Square Station was added in 1966, bringing the railroad right to the heart of one of Walt's favorite lands. Mickey's Toontown Station came in 1993. And Tomorrowland Station offers a departure point to the future by way of the past. But here's where the Disneyland Railroad becomes something more than transportation. In 1958, Disney added the Grand Canyon diorama to this train journey. Located in the tunnel between Tomorrowland and Main Street, this 306-foot painted canvas represents the view from the Grand Canyon southern rim. Now, it's not just a painting. The diorama features taxidermy animals, mountain lions, bighorn sheep, wild turkeys. There's even an armadillo. and it creates a frozen in time tableau. The train cars have seats turned to the face right so everybody can take in the view. And then in 1966 came Primeval World. Now the dinosaurs in this diorama originated from the 1964 New York's World's Fair, where they were part of the Ford Magic Skyway Pavilion. Disney brought them to Disneyland and placed them right after the Grand Canyon, creating a journey through time. From the American Southwest to the prehistoric age, audio animatronic dinosaurs moving, roaring, taking guests millions of years into the past. Now there's one more secret aboard the railroad. The Lily Bell parlor car. Now this was originally named the Grand Canyon Observation Car when it debuted in 1955. Well, it was converted in 1974 into a VIP presidential parlor car with ornate Victorian-era furnishings. Now, it was named for Walt's wife, of course, and that original backyard locomotive, the Lily Bell, has hosted dignitaries, royalty, and special guests. It runs on train number 1, and on certain days, very lucky guests can request a tour. If you've been on it, let me know in chat. Now, the Santa Fe Railway partnership ended in 1974. The railroad became simply the Disneyland Railroad, but it has never stopped running. 70 years, millions of passengers, countless memories. And every time the whistle blows, Walt's dream lives on. Let me pop over to chat. I see some good friends in chat. Miss Monorail Molly, hello. Hope you're doing great. Thanks for being here. Miss Bitritz, hello. Hope you're doing fantastic. Theme Park Casual, hey Danny. Hope you're doing great. Thanks for being here. I hope you all are enjoying the story so far. All right. Now, there's one more train in Disneyland's history that most people have forgotten. And it's not the mine train. It's another one that you may not know about. Well, the steam locomotives represented the past, of course. But Walt Disney's romance with transportation meant he needed a train of tomorrow. Well, enter the Viewliner. On June 10th, 1957, Disneyland unveiled something remarkable. It was a sleek, streamlined miniature train, and it looked like it had arrived from the future. It was designed by Disney Imagineer, our friend Bob Gurr. The Viewliner was modeled after General Motors' experimental Aerotrain. Now, this was a real locomotive that GM built in 1956, hoping to revolutionize passenger rail travel. Now, the Viewliner ran on a dog-bone circuit, a track with a loop at each end, threading through Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. There were 2 trains that were operating, one red with cars named after planets, one blue with cars named after Disney characters. Disneyland billed it as the fastest miniature train in the world. And here's what's powered it. Oldsmobile Rocket V8 engines mated to Jeep transfer cases. The windshields and doors were salvaged from 1954 automobile 88 coupes. Each locomotive weighed 5,000 pounds and can reach 30 miles per hour. Now, guests loved watching the Viewliner glide along its track, crossing paths with the motorboat crews, passed above the Junior Autopia. And at one point, a wooden trestle gave motorboat riders a view of the train's undercarriage, while elsewhere, a low concrete bridge made the Viewliner appear to skim across the water. But the Viewliner story was very short. September 30th, 1958. Just over a year after opening, the attraction closed. Construction was beginning on the Matterhorn, the submarine voyage, and what would become the Viewliner's replacement, of course, the Disneyland monorail. Now, look closely at the difference between this. Here's a Viewliner again. And take a look at the monorail. Does the siding, the color scheme, the passenger door mechanisms look a little familiar? Well, they're virtually identical to the Viewliner. It's like the passenger cars were lifted off their tracks and hoisted onto an elevated rail. Well, the Viewliner became one of the shortest-lived attractions in Disneyland history. But here's a wonderful coda, one that connects back to our earlier story about the animators who inspired Walt. Now, do you remember Ollie Johnston, the animator who helped rekindle Walt's love of trains? When the Viewliner track was torn up, well, Ollie Johnston acquired the railroad ties, all 1,100 of them. He used them to build his own narrow gauge railroad, in fact, the Deer Lake Park and Julian Railroad at his vacation home near Julian, California. From Disneyland's Train of Tomorrow to an animator's vacation retreat, the circle of Disney railroading continues in unexpected ways. Now, Walt Disney died on December 15, 1966. He never saw Walt Disney World open. He never walked down Magic Kingdom's Main Street. But his brother Roy made a promise. Roy Disney, who had been by Walt's side since the very beginning, managing finances, making the hard decisions, believing in his brother, even when the dream seemed impossible, took on the task of completing this giant Florida project. Now, Roy was 78 years old. Think about that for a moment. He could have easily retired. He could have let the project fade. But he had made a promise to his brother, and Roy Disney kept his promises. And he insisted the park would be called Walt Disney World. Not Disney World, Walt Disney World, so that people would always know whose vision made this possible. Well, the Magic Kingdom needed a railroad. That was never in question. But where would the locomotives come from? Like I mentioned, Roger Broggie had the answer. He led an expedition to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, and he found 5 steam locomotives that had served for decades, hauling everything from passengers to fiber that was used to make rope. Now, these weren't just Disney creations. These were working locomotives. They were built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works between 1916 and 1928. They had history. They had character. Well, Disney purchased them, shipped them to Tampa, and had them restored at the Tampa Ship Repair and Dry Dock Company. 4 of the 5 were fully restored, and 1 was kept for spare parts. Now, today, those locomotives bear the names of the people who made this all possible. Number 1 was Walter E. Disney, built by Baldwin in 1925, original number 245 on the Mexican Railroad. He was named for the man who started it all, of course. There was number 2, the Lily Bell, built in 1928, original number 254, named for Lillian Disney, the woman who said yes to a backyard railroad. Number 3 was Roger E. Broggie, built in 1925, named for the man who found these locomotives and made Walt's railroad dreams real. And number 4 was Rory O. Disney, built in 1916, original number 191, named for the brother that finished what Walt started. Now, on October 1st, 1971, the Walt Disney World Railroad welcomed its first passengers. But here's something really interesting that a lot of people don't know. On opening day, there was only 1 station, Main Street, U.S.A. If you boarded the train, you had to ride the whole loop. You were committed. No stops in between. And it wasn't until May 1st, 1972, 7 months after opening, that the Frontierland station was added. Of course, the 3rd station, is what is now Storybook Circus, didn't open until June 18th, 1988. The railroad experience evolved over time, just like the park itself. And evolution continues. You may remember this. In recent years, the Walt Disney World Railroad, it was closed for several years while Tron Light Cycle Run was constructed. Now, building that coaster required rerouting the train track and creating a new tunnel. On December 23rd, 2022, the railroad reopened. Tron opened the following spring in April. And now guests experience something remarkable. The steam trains of the 1920s pass underneath the futuristic Tron coaster. Past and future, side by side. It was just the way Walt would have wanted it. But there's one more railroad that we need to talk about, and most people have never heard of it. The Fort Wilderness Railroad. From 1974 to 1980, there was a narrow gauge steam railroad. It wound its way through Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground. This was 3.5 miles of track connecting campsites to the River Country Water Park. There were 4 locomotives, 20 passenger cars, and they were all built in-house by Wed Enterprises in Glendale. Now, these weren't vintage Mexican locomotives, but brand new steam trains purpose-built for Disney. It was very charming, but it was also problematic. Track maintenance in the Florida humidity, noise complaints from campers, low fuel capacity that required frequent stops. Well, after 1977, the railroad only ran occasionally. By February 1980, it was gone. The locomotives sat in storage forgotten until they were rediscovered. And this is where the story comes full circle. The man who found them was this gentleman, Michael Broggie, son of Roger Broggie, the very Imagineer who had built the Lily Bell for Walt's backyard, who had supervised construction of the Disneyland attraction, who had rescued the Mexican locomotives from the Yucatan. Like father, like son, Michael Broggie co-founded the Carrollwood Pacific Historical Society, dedicated to preserving Disney Railroad history. And when he found those forgotten Fort Wilderness locomotives, he made sure that they found new homes with fellow railroad enthusiasts. And here's a beautiful twist. Locomotive number 1 now lives at the Justy Creek Railway. This is a private railroad owned by John Lasseter. This is the same property where Ward Kimball's Grizzly Flats now stands. From Walt's animators to Walt's Imagineers to the next generation of Disney dreamers, this railroad family continues, and it's embedded in the very DNA of the people who bring us all these experiences. If you remember the Fort Wilderness train or any of these rides, please mention it in chat and we can compare notes. Well, Walt's love of trains didn't stay in America, of course. It traveled the world. When Tokyo Disneyland opened in 1983, it included the Western River Railroad, a steam train experience located in Western Land. Now, this is their version of Frontierland. But here's an interesting detail. Japanese local railway laws at the time applied to any railway that connected 2 points as transportation, even on private property. So the Western River Railroad was designed as a continuous loop with no intermediate stops. That avoids the regulation entirely. Now, that law was abolished in April 1st, 1987, which is why when Tokyo Disney Sea opened in 2001, they could do something different. They did something very different. The Disney Sea Electric Railway. Now, this isn't a steam train. This is an elevated electric railway. 2-car red trains reminiscent of historic elevated railways connecting American waterfront to Port Discovery. It functions as both an attraction and actual transportation. This is a very, very unique addition to the Disney Railroad family. Disneyland Paris opened in 1992. It features its own Disneyland Railroad, a grand circle tour similar to the American parks with multiple stations circling the park. And there's Hong Kong Disneyland. Opened in 2005, it continued the tradition with its own railroad experience. And then there's Shanghai Disneyland, which opened in 2016. You notice something missing here? No railroad. Shanghai Disneyland breaks from tradition. Now, this park was designed with a different transportation philosophy, and the railroad, that most sacred of Disney traditions, was left out. It's a reminder that even traditions can evolve. Each park reflects its own time, its own culture, its own choices. But for those of us who love the trains, we'll always have Disneyland, we'll always have the Magic Kingdom, and we'll always have that whistle. And now the question we have to ask of every attraction: does it work? Well, let's evaluate the Disney Railroad experience all up using our 3 pillars. First one, immersion. How does it do in that respect? Well, the Disneyland Railroads offer something truly remarkable: authentic sensory immersion. You hear the steam whistle. This is not a recording, not an MP3. This is a real thing. You smell the coal and oil. You feel the rhythm of the wheels on the train, the slight sway of the cars. These are real steam locomotives, and your body knows it. While the stations are period appropriate, Main Street Station is Victorian Gem, of course. Cast members wear period costumes. The passenger cars have wooden benches and brass fittings. And then there are the Disneyland dioramas. The Grand Canyon and Primeval World take you through time. you feel the temperature drop as you enter that tunnel. There's the darkness, the painted vista, the dinosaurs moving in the prehistoric twilight. It's transportive in a way that many modern attractions with all their technology struggle to match. What could be better? That narration can get repetitive for frequent riders. Some sightlines have aged a little bit, but overall it's a great experience. I give it an 8 out of 10. Now, pillar 2, storytelling. Well, what story does a railroad tell? Well, on one level, it's the story of a Grand Circle tour, a journey through the lands of the different parks, each station representing a different era, a different world. But there is something on the deeper level. This story is Walt's story. The locomotives are named after real people: Roger Brogy, Lillian Disney, Ward Kimball. Each train carries history with it. The Disneyland dioramas add explicit narrative moments: the majesty of the Grand Canyon, the prehistoric drama of primeval world. Now, these aren't just decorations, they're chapters in a story through time. What do you think could be better? Walt Disney World, granted, lacks the diorama experiences, which makes that railroad feel a little bit more like transportation and a little bit less like storytelling. And the onboard narration could be a little bit more varied, more surprising, but overall it works. I have to give it also an 8 out of 10. Finally, there's delight. Does a railroad surprise you? Does it move you? Does it make you smile? My goodness, absolutely. The whistle is pure magic. It echoes through the park, announcing arrivals, creating atmosphere. Children point, adults pause. There's something about it that transcends age. Just imagine being on Main Street for a moment and not hearing that whistle. Well, the railroad offers multi-generational appeal. Kids love trains. That's universal. They always have, they always will. Adults appreciate the nostalgia and the chance to rest their feet. And grandparents, some of them remember when steam trains were everyday transportation. This ride connects them to their childhoods. There's the above it all perspective, seeing the park from a different angle, spotting details you miss on foot. There's a Lily Bell parlor car, a hidden gem for those who know how to ask. And there's some emotional resonance. For a lot of guests, riding the train is a tradition. It's what they did with their parents. It's what they do with their children, what they'll do with their grandchildren. Gotta give it a high score. Gotta give it a 9 out of 10. So overall, this gives us an overall score of about 8.3 out of 10. Now, the Disney railroads are more than attractions. They're time machines. They're family traditions. There's the sound of a whistle that connects us all to each other, to the past, to Walt's original dream. Now, let's hear from you. Go ahead and go to the site if you haven't already, www.grandandmiraculous.show. Let me hit show here. Use voting code WDRR tonight. Tell us what you think of the overall railroad experience, and I look forward to seeing what you all say. Now, before we go, let's answer our trivia question. What year was a primeval world diorama added to the Disneyland Railroad, and what was its origin? Well, the answer, Primeval World opened on July 1st, 1966. Audio animatronic dinosaurs originated from the 1964 New York World's Fair, where they were part of the Ford Magic Skyway Pavilion. You may remember that attraction if we talked about the People Mover. If you missed it, you can go back and watch it. So, wrapping up, here's a story we told tonight. In Marceline, Missouri, there was a young boy who watched his Uncle Mike, Santa Fe's engine thunder past, and there was something that was stirring in his heart. In San Gabriel, California, an animator named Ward Kimball built a railroad in his backyard and invited his boss to come see it. On Carrollwood Drive in Holmby Hills, that boss, now a famous man, built his own railroad, named the locomotive after his wife, and he gave rides to the neighborhood children. And at Disneyland, that railroad went from a backyard dream to a national treasure. And when Walt died, his brother made sure the tradition continued at Walt Disney World. Today, from Anaheim to Orlando, from Tokyo to Paris, the trains still run. Now, the lesson here is simple, but very profound. A childhood passion, nurtured and protected, it can change the world. Walt never forgot the sound of that whistle. He never outgrew the romance of the rails. And because he held on to that love, he was able to share it with millions of people. Every time a train circles Disneyland, every time that whistle blows at the Magic Kingdom, Walt's dream lives on. Now, as we do, like to tease next week, we have covered 30 episodes with you, and I am so grateful for you being here along with me with the journey. It's been great. However, now that we have 30 episodes under our belt, it's time to make a little change, huh? It's time to go off the reservation. Well, next week on episode 31, we're leaving Disney property. I know. Cue the excitement. I know we had an episode at the Space Needle. Technically, that counted too. But for the most part, we've covered Disney attractions on this show. So it's time to shift our focus a little bit. For 30 episodes, we've explored the magic of Disney theme parks. The rides, the railroads, the attractions that Walt and his Imagineers created. But the story of the theme park industry is bigger than any one company. Next week, episode 31 takes us to Universal Studios Hollywood, and specifically to one of the longest running attractions in theme park history, the Studio Tour. The Universal Studios Tour is a journey through a working movie studio, through back lots and sound stages, past earthquake simulations and shark attacks. From the early days of Carl Laemmle to the modern era of blockbusters. It's been running in one form or another since 1964. That's before the Magic Kingdom even existed. And it even got its start way back in 1915. That's an eternity in theme park time. So please join us next week as Grand and Miraculous ventures off Disney property to visit the enormously rich history of the Universal Studios Tour. And for now, we'll close tonight with words from Ray Bradbury, who understood Walt Disney perhaps better than any single person. Gather round the next great campfire. Let us seek and know and understand and dream a new book, a new instruction book to fly great spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock into dream that is your own, find what truth is in your blood, and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. Lock into dream that is your own. Walt Disney locked into that dream that was his own for sure. He found what truth was in his blood, the sound of a whistle, the rhythm of the rails, and he beat a path from Marceline to Main Street. His life was his to own, and he used it to shape the world. Thank you, everybody, for riding with us tonight. Please hit like, subscribe, and share out the stream if you enjoyed any part of this. Until next time, keep the wonder alive and listen for the whistle.